This is Phoenix Incandescent, Chapter 3, Step on His Foot. Charlotte walked along the loft in the library, listening to the thrum of music from the dance hall. Her fingers strummed the beat against the banister, and she thought of whom she might meet and dance with tonight. Would she find a new face? Would an old face present a new side? Was it possible that she might find somebody to love the night she planned to leave? She hummed a laugh at the thought and smiled. She lived in a castle. She dealt with magic second-hand daily. But this was no fairy tale. There was no prince on a white horse right outside her window. No, in her story, she could ride her own horse to freedom tonight. Charlotte leaned over the iron banister and remembered the sound of her father's steady voice as he taught his classes. She had sat up here many times when she was younger, hopeful that someday she would join the class. But as the years went on and her hopes diminished, she stopped coming to the classes. She stared down at the worn desks and chairs, lined up and ready for the new school year. "Room for two." Bo stepped out from under the loft. "Plenty." She gripped the banister. "Come on up." He stepped back and angled his head up at her. His sun-soaked brown hair fell back and his wings spread out a little. "What is it?" "I'll only come up there if there are no glasses of water around." "Come here." She waved him up. "I have no water, but if you misbehave, I'm sure I can find a cup of cold tea around here somewhere. Papa is always leaving them behind on bookshelves." She smiled at the familiar sound of whooshing air as Bo flew up and landed on the loft. Show off. He was dressed in slacks now, but his hair was still windblown and his feet were still bare. He smelled fresh of wind and earth and a faint hint of seawater. "Call me Cupid, for I am here to deliver you to your Prince Charming." He paused and winked at her. "Scratch that. Your parents invited several. However will you choose?" "Personally, I'll start with the ones who wear shirts," Charlotte teased. Bo's eyes grew large in mock surprise, and then frowned with mock displeasure. "Do you have any idea how hard it would be to make a shirt for me, let alone get it on?" He teased one of the ruffles of her dress. "Good for you that I'm not in the slightest interested in some wingless Dane who wears shirts." Charlotte nudged his hand away from her dress. "Your mother and sister wear tops." Bo threw his head back and laughed. "For obvious reasons." He offered his hand. "You know, you should be delighted to be escorted to your party by a muscly-winged man with no shirt on. It gives you a safety net while meeting guys tonight." She took his hand. "Well, I'm surprised my parents are allowing you to escort me. I would think that they would worry about you chasing off potential suitors." Bo tapped the outside of her hand with his thumb. "They came home this morning to find me cleaning water off the kitchen floor. I think they're more worried about you chasing off potential suitors." Charlotte put her hands on her hips. She wanted to say so much, but she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to stop when she started. She bottled her secrets up tighter and dropped her arms to her sides. Bo's lips straightened and his brown eyes focused on hers. "Have you made your decision?" Charlotte pursed her lips. At least he had asked her, but she was still irritated at him for spending the summer away. It was supposed to have been her summer to say goodbye to him, too. When they were together, they were inseparable. They both came and went from this state without worry about bothering each other. It was how their friendship worked. Until the summer. She frowned at him. "Did you enjoy the summer away?" She didn't cover her displeased tone. "You're mad at me?" he asked, amused. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and glared. He raised his eyebrows. "It's been a long time since we fought." She stared back at him silently, daring him to ask why. He squeezed her arm gently. "No quarrels between us tonight, Lottie." She held his gaze. He drummed the banister with his fingers. "There are a couple of possible wackos down there to stay away from." He gently tugged a strand of her blonde hair. "I took the liberty of interviewing some of them while we waited for you ladies to finish getting ready." She shook her head at him and tapped her fingers against her arms. He shook his head at her and pulled her into a hug. "Dear Lottie, why are you angry with me? Sincerely, Bo." "Dear Bo, you were gone the entire summer." "Not so sincerely, Charlotte." "Dear Charlotte, that's not a new thing. I'm confused. But I did miss you. Does that help? Please write back. Bo." Charlotte gave in. She couldn't expect him to understand how important the summer was supposed to be when she hadn't told him what she was thinking. She offered him a smile as a truce. "Did you have a good summer?" "I met a girl," he offered. Charlotte took a step back. Of course he met a girl. Why wouldn't he? "Well, at least one of us met somebody." He stared at her quietly for a couple of minutes. "Come meet her. Her name is Raven. You'll like her." Charlotte forced a smile to her lips. "Of course." He nodded to the first floor of the library. He threw his legs over the banister and held his hand out. "Shall we?" She nodded and let him steady her as she threw her own legs over the banister. He pulled her into his arms, spread out his wings, and jumped down to the first floor. Charlotte pulled away quickly and headed for the door. "You've changed since you've been gone." Bo caught up with her as she pushed open the library's double doors. "People do that," she said softly. "I've missed you," she added. "Let's do something together tomorrow." Bo tugged another strand of her hair. "Would you like that?" "I would." She quieted her heart. There would not be a tomorrow for them. But at least, he offered, at least she would have that. "Save me a dance." He grabbed her hand and squeezed. "I will." She let his hand drop, but hung on to the imprint of warmth he had left until it vanished from her skin. She took a deep breath at the entrance of the hall. Bo offered his arm. She slipped her hand into his elbow. "You better save me one." Bo patted her hand. "If you don't, I'll claim one anyway." She curtsied and gave him a full smile. "Fine, then." Charlotte's heart pounded with excitement as she walked into the dance hall on Bo's arm. He winked at her, then stepped back as her parents came forward. They led her up to the stage where she hoped she was smiling enough, but not too much, as her father made a speech in her honor. She blushed as he called her a beauty like her mother, and laughed at his insistence that every eligible bachelor dance with her right after they submitted a detailed application with character references. The room was soon full of music and dancing once more. Her first dance was with her father, which suited her fine. They had danced together many times during her childhood, starting with him dancing with her in his arms when she was an infant. He claimed that it was the only way she would settle for him. As a child, she would dance with her feet propped on his. Now that she was taller, it was a whole new experience. She had to know the steps, for one. Charlotte stumbled along, catching the steps correctly when she could. Her father's eyes laughed, and his lips curled up now and then. He leaned close and kissed her on the forehead. "I had forgotten," he chuckled teasingly. "If you see one you like, step on his foot hard." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Papa, you can nurse him after, and since you don't dance well, unless you're on your own, he'll never know it's a setup." Charlotte glanced over to her mother and nodded her head toward her father. "Save me," she mouthed. Audrey nodded toward her own dancing partner. "Sorry," she mouthed back. "Your mother and I are very proud of you." Isaac's eyes darted between the two women. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but closed it quickly. He nodded to Bo instead. "I wonder when he's going to settle down, or if he ever will. I take it he likes his life the way it is right now." Charlotte added, "On the other hand, maybe he needed to find the right one. He met a girl this summer." "Oh, has he?" Isaac said. "Wilder didn't mention a girl. Is that the one he's dancing with?" Charlotte stole a glance at the couple. Bo's dancing partner wasn't a bronze eagle, but like them she did have wings. She was a dark beauty with jet black wings, short black hair, and eyes dark as night. They were a stunning pair. Together they were chocolate and caramel. "Her name is Raven. He's going to introduce me to her later." She turned her face away from the couple and frowned at her father's waistcoat. "Sometimes it's hard to watch childhood friends grow up and form new relationships," Isaac said quietly to the top of Charlotte's head. "Humph," Charlotte mumbled. "Just don't forget that it's probably hard on him, too." Isaac patted her back. He kissed her forehead, and Charlotte quieted her thoughts. She focused on the warmth of his hands, the glare of the room's light on his glasses, the shine on his nice shoes. She wanted to scold him for leaving for the summer. She wanted to cry on his shoulder and tell him everything. She wanted to be 5 again. She would give anything to rewind time and live her childhood again. Only this time she would sit in his lap a little longer. She would take more walks with him. She would breathe it all in a little slower. "Isaac," Audrey scolded when she finally made her way over to them, "are you tormenting your grown daughter?" "That would be found in my job description," Isaac said with a gruff tone paired with kind eyes. "Well, darling, I've come to claim you." She snaked her arm around his arm and winked at Charlotte. "Don't worry, I've laid claim on the rest of his dances." Charlotte smiled at their backs as they made their way through the throng of dancers. She thought for a moment about mingling with some of the other young women, but for the next hour and a half she found herself constantly being asked to dance. She danced with familiar faces, though it was true that a few of them she hadn't seen since they were younger. She stepped on a few feet, but mostly by accident. It was a relief when she finally found herself with enough time to dash out of the room to catch a break. There had been no connections or fireworks, and at this point she would have taken a small spark as a good omen. She slipped into one of the empty offices and kicked her shoes off before she stretched out onto a couch to catch her breath. She'd enjoyed the dancing, the conversations, and the meeting new guys. Most of them. There was one of her father's students who felt compelled to dance with her while he spoke of the beautiful ladies he was after that night. He even had the audacity to ask Charlotte which one she thought was the prettiest. She had stepped on his foot on purpose, and there was no nursing of injuries afterwards. The door slammed open and a young couple stumbled in, clawing at each other's clothes on the way to the couch. It was the bragger and his latest catch. Charlotte rolled her eyes and bolted for the open door, only to run into a suited chest. "Oops," she cried out before adding an apology. The man flashed her a smile. He was a handsome one, much more so than anybody else she'd seen that night. He was dressed in a stunning suit and polished a glaring shine shoes. He bowed. "My apologies for startling you, though I believe I found who I'm looking for. You're Isaac's daughter, correct?" "Yes, I am." Charlotte smiled over at his straight white teeth and short curly black hair. Goodness, even his ears were perfectly shaped. She found her voice before her mind got lost looking at him. "I'm afraid I don't know who you are." The tall man held out his hand. "My name is Philip. I am a former student of your father." Charlotte couldn't contain the flush she felt that came over her face, but she also raised an eyebrow before she took his hand. "How former of a student are you?" He frowned briefly. Charlotte wanted to kick herself. "Oh, I meant no offense. I wanted to know because it's hard to tell with you weavers in your long lifespan. You look young for so terribly long." "No, out of one hole and straight into another like it." She wanted to kick herself again. "Sorry again," she sighed. "I'm afraid I stumble over words periodically." She tilted her head. "Frequently." He chuckled. His eyebrows were still high, but he smiled. "Oh, I was a student long enough ago to remember you with braids, a tutu, and smudges of dirt on your face," Philip remarked as they walked back to the dance hall. "Oh dear, you have me at a disadvantage then." Charlotte nodded toward the left hallway. "Would you care for a short stroll? I'd like a second chance at a decent conversation, if you aren't scared off by now." Philip flashed a smile. "Lead the way." They walked out to the courtyard. It was cool and quieter here. The moon and stars lit up the sky, and the sounds of their shoes clicking against the cement startled the quiet. Charlotte felt her muscles relaxing. Perhaps out here the pressure would be off and she could get to know this man. It was hard to get to know somebody during a dance. "So where are you from?" Charlotte asked. They had stopped at the edge of the pool. She stared down at the reflection of the sky. "Nowhere," Philip began. "Well, everywhere," he grinned. "Not long enough at one place to call anywhere home, I suppose." "The opposite of me, then. I'd love to travel." She stared into his eyes. "You must want to sit still." "I suppose it would depend on who I'm with." Charlotte blushed. Philip reached for her hand. She let him take it. "Will you be missed?" he asked. Charlotte looked through the large arched windows at the room full of light and dancing. "Not yet. I needed a break anyway," she admitted. "In the magical world there aren't many coming out parties for Dane weavers, so I knew you must be special." "Oh, well, frankly, I'm surprised that you are still single." Charlotte drifted somewhere in between the ground and the sky. She could feel the smile and the rush of heat staining her cheeks and she was glad for the darkness of the night to hide some of it. "I've been away in the Dane world for a few years." "Well, that explains it," he smiled and then started to hum. "I'm afraid that I arrived late. I've yet to even have a dance tonight. Would you do me the honor?" He stepped back and bowed. "Oh, why, yes." Charlotte took his hand and let him sweep her around the courtyard. They danced around the pool in a pocket of time that seemed to be set aside for the two of them. He hummed a song she didn't recognize. Neither of them missed a step. "That was perfect," she gushed. "I've never danced so well in my entire life." Philip pulled her close and grinned at her. "I put a spell on you," he admitted. "That's what magic is for, making life perfect." Charlotte swallowed hard. He had put a spell on her without even asking. She tried to calm her mind. Weavers were not supposed to spell each other without asking, save for specific circumstances. Yes, the dance had been beautiful, but it had also been fake. She felt cheated. He flashed his perfect smile with his perfect teeth, all dressed in a perfect suit, and suddenly she felt perfectly sick. She stepped back. "Philip, thank you for the dance. Let's head back. It's gotten cold, and I have several more people to dance with, and then I think I'll mingle." He stepped closer to her, jolting her backwards until she hit the stonework of the castle. "I was thinking of something a little more personal and quiet." He pressed his hands into her shoulders. I could warm you up," he said, and pressed his body against hers. The jagged edges of the stone scraped her shoulders and the backs of her arms, and she shivered from his presence rather than the cold. "No, thanks," she said firmly. She tried to step to the side, scraping her back a little. "I'll be going now." He pushed her up against the wall harder and stared deep into her eyes. "You don't have many options, you know. Nobody of any worth wants a Dane Weaver." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She glared at him. "I guess you must be one of the worthless ones, then." A flash of anger crossed the man's face quickly before he corrected it to show no emotion. "Why your parents even bothered to throw you this pitiful ball is beside me." He paused and smiled a horrible smile. "Tell me, are you really their child?" He twirled her hair around his finger. "You don't look a thing like either of them. Perhaps you're a pet of theirs to dress up and pretend with. Is tonight their way of auctioning you off, perhaps? Maybe they're ready for a new toy?" He dusted her shoulders off as if she were a doll found in the attic. Charlotte couldn't control the shiver she felt, so close to this man and his words. She had known a few jerks in her life, but this man took it to a new level. She nudged him away, hoping to get as far away from him as soon as possible, but was caught off guard when he shoved her back against the wall and held his hand over her mouth before she could even think to scream. The music from the dancing hall was loud, covering up any sounds she did manage to make. "Tisk, tisk," Philip breathed in her ear. "Everyone is having fun and dancing. They aren't even going to think of looking for you for a while." He traced her neck and collarbone. "It is such a pity that you are not magical. You would be a fairly pretty specimen." "Get off me," she mumbled through the hand on her mouth. "I've got to find a place to stash you first." He pressed up against her harder. Charlotte panicked. She kicked her shoes off to the side and tried to kick at him. He shoved her head against the building. "Enough." He grabbed her arms and pulled her forward. Charlotte threw herself at him and knocked them both down on the floor. "Get away from her, you disgusting pile of worms!" Bo stomped toward them. Raven was at his side. Philip stood from where he had fallen. "Stay out of this, birds." He calmly straightened his clothes, even as Bo neared him with a glare that would frighten most. Raven offered Charlotte a hand up. She glared at the man. "You need to leave, now." Bo added quickly, "If not by your own accord, then I will personally escort you out." Philip didn't even flinch. A crooked smile glazed his lips. "I will leave when my master commands me to, and not a moment before." He turned his gaze to Charlotte. "I've been following your parents for some time now. Good thing I waited. This little event will be much more profitable for my master." He snarled, and with a snap of his fingers, vanished. Charlotte's knees buckled, but Raven held on to her side. Bo hurried to the other side. "He's gone. It's okay. You handle yourself well. He won't mess—" "Bo, we need to warn my parents now. He was threatening everybody here." "I'll go. You two stay here." "No, I'll go," Raven inserted quickly. "I think Charlotte needs somebody who knows her a little better to stick with her for the moment. Make sure she rests. I'll bring her parents here after I talk to them." "Good idea. Thanks, Raven." Charlotte blinked her eyes furiously until she was certain that she wouldn't cry before looking Bo in the eyes for the first time since he came outside. "We should follow." Bo looked in her eyes a little longer than she would have liked. "Let's take a quick walk to the kitchen. We'll have Basil make you some hot tea and warn the Hobbs who are around." Charlotte took his arm for the second time that night. She could feel his muscles clenching in his arm. She shivered and held on to him. The same stars and moon hung over. The same cold touched her skin. But everything looked and felt different now. They halted outside the kitchen doors. The lights were out. There were no Hobbs. No plates of food for the ball. No Basil. Even the fire was snuffed out. Lying to the side of the door was Lynx, still as stone. Charlotte gasped and started for the ground. Bo pulled her back up by the tops of her arms. "I know this is bad, but I think we need to move on quickly. Neither of us can do anything if it's magic, and we can't be sure that it's not a spell that will transfer from one body to another." Boom. The ground beneath them shuddered. Boom. Screams shattered the silence. Strikes of light flashed. Boom. They both nearly fell to their knees. Bo turned her around to face him and put her arms around his neck. "Hold on." Charlotte held on tight, digging into her own skin with her nails. "I don't like heights, Bo. I don't like what's going on down there." His voice was calm and deeper than she was used to. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "My parents, your parents and sister, everybody," she cried out. "I know, Lottie, but this isn't the place for you right now. Your father will care for your mother, and the place is packed with weavers. I have to get you to safety." Charlotte focused on her breathing, deep, slow, steady. The cold night air swept across her bare shoulders, and she shivered. She didn't dare open her eyes. Leaping from banisters aside, she had flown with Bo only once before when they were young. He wasn't strong enough to fly with somebody yet, and he had ended up dropping her to the ground in a crash of bones and blood. He had blamed her for being wiggly. She had blamed him for dropping her. Both sets of parents had blamed them for being irresponsible. They hadn't tried it again. It was the wrong memory to think of. Charlotte groaned and coughed against Bo's chest. "I think I'm going to throw up." Bo wasted no time in landing. Never in her wildest dreams had Charlotte imagined that someday she would be in the middle of a field throwing up in a gorgeous dress in front of a guy. The night had gone from hopeful to perfect to rotten. It all hit her. Philip, the threat to her family, Lynx, the Hobbs, everyone at the castle. She tried to stifle the sobs, but it was too late. She hurried away from where she had lost her supper and knelt down in the dirt and grass near the tree line. Bo knelt down in front of her. "Don't look at me, please," she ordered him through the tears. He put his arms around her and lay his head on top of hers and let her cry. "Lottie," he whispered in her hair after she had ceased crying, "do you want me to fly back and check on things?" "Not without me," she answered as she wiped her eyes and pulled herself together. Bo sighed heavily and stared up into the sky. "I don't want to leave you here alone, and I'm not sure when it'll be safe to go back." Charlotte desperately wanted to know what had happened, but she also did not want to be alone. They sat back to back, staring out into the night, unsure of what to do next. Bo's wings were soft and warm and comforting. She leaned into his back and placed the side of her face against him. "Are we cowards for leaving?" She clenched and unclenched her hands in her dress. Bo turned his head to the side. "What exactly would you have done?" he asked with a gruffness she wasn't expecting. She opened her mouth to reply, but he continued. "What chance do you think you would have against magic? Or is this about me? What was I supposed to do? Leave you to be harmed?" Oh, so now he would fight. She sat forward. "I'm so sorry I don't have magic, Bo. It's really inconvenient for you, isn't it?" she spat out. He stood up and walked over to stand in front of her. "I don't have magic, Charlotte." She stood up and glared at him. "It's not about you, you know. You haven't listened to a word of what I said today." She dropped her eyes briefly. "Not really, anyway." He stared at her then, eyes sharp and mouth thinned into a straight line. "It's been a while," he said, "and I'm not as well versed in your undercurrents of speech." He glared. "And dumping ice water over my head doesn't qualify as adult conversation." Charlotte could have slugged him. She wiped away the couple of tears gathering in her eyes and turned away. All she wanted was to spend some time with him, and he had been off with a girl bird. She stomped her foot into the dirt. She had wasted an entire summer waiting on the people she loved to come home so she could be with them one last time. "You don't understand," she yelled. "I can't understand what you don't tell me," he yelled back. "You," she spat out, "were supposed to be home this summer. I hardly saw you for 4 years, and when I get home, nobody was here." He took a step forward. "But I'm here now, Lottie." She took 2 steps back from him. "Oh, Bo." She shook her head at him. She couldn't tell him. "I'm sorry," she apologized. Bo's voice softened. "Me too." He squeezed her arms. "So let me be here for you. What happened tonight?" Charlotte closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She told him everything from the moment she had run into Philip. His tidiness, his perfectionism, his melting good looks. She told him of the dance and of the words he said to her as he pressed her into the stone. Bo's hands ran gently over her arms and back, as if he could smooth the scrapes and memories away with a touch. Charlotte shivered. She closed her eyes. "Do you think any of what he said is true?" "No," he responded immediately. "I think he sounds like a manipulating creep." "I can't get his words out of my head," she confessed. "I wish I could wash them away." "Say them again, louder. Don't hold it in and let it do damage." She crossed her arms in front of her chest. "You heard them the first time, Bo Wingard. I'm not repeating them. Once was enough, and I shouldn't have done that much." "No, you're getting it backwards. By keeping it in, you're giving him power. You may think that holding it in gives you power over him, because that way it shows he didn't get to you, but you are totally wrong. Holding it in lets it fester and grow," he scolded her. She considered that for a few moments. Bo was never one to sugarcoat anything or say something because it was what he thought she wanted to hear. He paced in front of her while she thought. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, his wings ruffled from time to time. Bo turned to her, eyes lit up. "Charlotte, do you think you puked it all up?" She gave him a playful shove. "Okay, we're going to have to agree to keep that incident between each other." He pulled her close, put his arms around her waist, and lifted into the air. "Let's go high enough so you aren't shy and yell the words to the wind." This time flying didn't catch her off guard, and she proudly kept the contents of her stomach, if there was any left, inside. Bo had been right. Up in the clear, cold sky, she could yell the words and not feel so self-conscious. And once they were out, she didn't feel the emotional churning she had over them. It was a little like puking the bad feelings out. She didn't want it to happen, but she felt a lot better afterwards. Their descent was leisurely. Charlotte wondered if she should tell him her plans, but decided against it. Once she left, they would suspect Bo of helping her right away. She couldn't ask him to lie, and her father would be able to give him truth serum if the council got involved. It was good that he had found Raven. She could be there for him. They landed and sat down on the ground. Bo spread his wings out. "Come sit closer to me." He wrapped his wings around them both. She leaned against his arms. "Do you remember when we were kids and we would do this while we were playing hide and seek? We thought we were so clever." Bo chuckled. "I'm sure our parents got a good laugh out of that one. It would take them so long to find us that we thought we had the best hiding spot in the world. The whole time they're having tea and chatting." They both laughed, and the thought of not knowing what had happened to the castle was eating at her again. Charlotte slipped her hand into his. "Can we strike a compromise? How about we go back and you leave me somewhere safe, close by, while you check things out?" "Do you know of—" The sound of galloping hooves broke Bo's sentence. They stood up and saw Zarok, a Clydesdale centaur who lived at the castle. Centaurs were routinely large, but Zarok was immense due to the Clydesdale half of him. "Good, you're both safe," he said in his deep, gravelly voice. "We need to get back to the castle now. Bo, you go ahead and fly Charlotte back. It'll be safer in the air at the moment. But pace yourself with me and always keep me in your sight. Do you understand? We are all still in danger." He shook one of his hands at his side. "There is a magical shield around the castle. Meet me by the back gate and I will take you through." He turned and galloped away. And that is it for chapter 3. See you later, guys. Bye.